How do we know that our revolutionary medical device is going to be actually a market success? To answer this question, I brought in Jim Surek. Jim is an expert in commercialization of medical devices and turning around startup launches. Jim has led 6 successful exits across different medical fields, and he's currently CEO of Valencia Technologies. Jim is going to tell us about his framework to assess the clinical, economical, and strategic value of medical devices and how to really assess if the device is going to be viable, what startups and established companies should be looking out for when commercializing a new medical device, how the US and the EU funding cultures differ, and how holistic device design can really make market success. Here's our discussion. So hi, Jim, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Jim, you're an expert for commercializing medical device. What does commercialization mean in your world?
So over the years, it's evolved. It changes because the market changes, but there's some characteristics that I think a lot of people don't take into consideration. I was just at a panel for a neurotech meeting, and question was asked about commercialization. That's why I was brought there. And we have to keep in mind the market in the MedTech world. I operate in, the United States. I don't do much, if at all, outside the United States. But when you look at our healthcare system and how you bring products to market, you have to think about, if you think about it as a funnel, and that funnel at the top third is a clinical value. Okay. The second third is economic financial value. The bottom third is strategic and operational value. And so if you drop the product through that funnel, you have to ask these simple questions. What clinical value is this product providing for the patient, the doctor's practice, the healthcare system? If you can clearly define that, and it can't be 10% more efficacious, that's not good enough. That's just minor tweaks to a product that if you've already have a product, you're making minor tweaks to it. But if you're launching a new product, bringing a new product to market, it has to be greater than that. And when you get to the economic and financial, you ask the same question. What is the economic financial value to the patient, the doctor, the practice, and the healthcare system? And people will ask, well, what do you mean by financial value for a patient? Are they saving money, right, by doing this procedure and or taking a medication, and or are they saving time taking out of work to go back to a doctor's office? There's a lot of value when you look at it from the patient's perspective as well, financially, economically, and I throw time in there as well. How does that benefit them? Then the doctor, is the doctor getting paid? Is the practice going to make more money? Is the healthcare system going to save money? Is the institution in which they're doing business at going to be profitable doing this? Or because if we're just switching products out because it's 10% more effective and 10%, let's call it cheaper. Well, hospitals and ASCs are not going to bring a product in because of a minor economic value, because it costs more for them to change their systems to bring a new product in. And then you get to the strategic value and operational value. Am I going to be able to attract more patients? Am I going to be able to just do more with what I have strategically? Is it going to save me time? And then from an operational perspective, what does it do for my institution, my practice, everything else that I'm doing? And if you can take a product and go through that funnel and ask those questions, then you have a good commercial product. If you don't have that, then you don't have a commercially viable product. You just have a me too that's a little bit cheaper, faster, quicker, and that's where you have to start. So it's a long answer to a simple question. But if founders of companies are not thinking about that, then they get to market and they're like, well, my product's better. Well, yeah, but to who, to why, to what? You have to go much, much deeper than that.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying is, because those are all questions that I would ask myself in developing a device. So because what usually when we have a technical founder, then they think like, I have this cool tech and it can be 10% cheaper, 10% better, 10% that. and I think I have a cool tech. I'm going to apply it, and I build it and people will buy. And then I bring in like a commercialization guy to just go sell my product. But like all these questions that you ask are essential questions that you should be asking yourself when you start medical device development. So you will have to think about commercialization when you build the product.
I mean, that's exactly it. Because somebody has an idea of a product and they're like, isn't this cool? And then the next question should be, who's going to pay for it? In the United States, there's this conversation of, well, we shouldn't make decisions based on who's going to pay for it. I'm like, okay, well, then you put your money in, right? And knowing that you may have the greatest product in the world, but our reimbursement system isn't set up where you're actually going to get paid for that, right? And so you have to ask yourself that. People will actually say, which I mean, it's an intellectual conversation, but it's not based in reality. Well, we shouldn't base our decisions on what products we bring to market because of our reimbursement system. I'm like, well, then you invest your money, you invest your time, because you could create the greatest thing in the world. And if a hospital goes, I'm not losing money because of your great idea, and you're like, well, it's better for the patients. Well, then the patients are going to have to pay for it. Right. And then the whole argument falls apart. And founders, a lot of founders don't want to have that conversation because it's uncomfortable. Because you have to admit that you might have a really good mousetrap, but not for this healthcare system. You don't.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I don't know how much the US and EU systems differ there, but there's also like the discussion with reimbursement and who's going to pay for it. Like healthcare cost is through the roof. And therefore, like saving money can also be like a motivation to bring your device in. But if it's just saving money for one part of the value chain and not for everybody, then it's not going to be viable. So what you're also proposing is like that you look holistically onto all stakeholders. You look at the insurance, you look at the patient, you look at the physician, you look at the hospital, but also like the medical device manufacturer also has to make money with the thing, else you wouldn't invest your time and precious resources for it. So what would you say would be moving the needle? Because you said like 10% better in X or in cost or in patient outcome. What would be a needle mover for you?
Yeah. So that's why I start with the clinical value. In this funnel is the top most important part of this. So clinically, if it has to be a game-changing device for me, right? This is for me. You might have, the Johnsons of the world who will, developing a product for a little iteration because they can pick up a little bit more market share. But my perspective is coming from the startup environment because I've just been in startups my entire career. So when you're looking at a clinical, it has to be fairly dramatic. You're either changing an outcome by 30, 40%, where it's either clinically the patient's under, in a surgery, 30 or 40% less time, that clinically the outcomes show a 30, 40% greater improvement quicker, and or you're treating a population that can't be treated today or isn't being treated today. So it can be a new procedure or a new patient population that can get the procedure because the current procedures that exist are too invasive. They're not well tolerated, and or patients just choose not to go through that procedure because they don't see the value in it. And so that's the biggest thing. And then from a financial perspective, that one is really easier because as long as I'm making the same amount of money and my facility is making the same amount of money or more, then I'll go along with it as long as the clinical benefits are there. Now, from a new procedure perspective, that changes everything. Because now I'm bringing new revenue with new patients into a facility. That's very attractive to the entire healthcare system. Because if I'm on, let's say, a medication that costs the patient, let's say, $2,000, $3,000 a year or more, but it's also insurance is paying for it, the healthcare system's paying for it. But now I can get you off medication into a procedure that sets you free, right? I don't have to deal with it. Now you've really changed the marketplace because and then from a strategic perspective, I'm the doctor, I'm the facility, and I'm attracting new patients. Operationally, I become more efficient, more effective. Now you've hit a grand slam.
So you would say like clinical is number one, and then there you would be looking at something like 30-40% increase. And then even if you have the same cost at the 30-40% outcome, that would be better. And like, let's say like for cost savings, what will move the needle if you just like, okay, same outcome, but I save this much?
Yeah,
Then
I
will be
don't
looking at
know
it.
because good question, because I don't really dabble in that area of, a cheaper product, right? Because that's really what we're saying. We're like, well, it's just cheaper. And that's where the healthcare system, and I mean like a hospital, would have to say, because I've never dealt with it, but how less expensive does it have to be for me to make a global change? Because remember, these systems are integrated, right? So they've got products, they've got contracts, they have rebates. And how big does that have to be to get them to change? It's an interesting question. I've never delved into that just because I don't want to participate in a cheap commodity like product.
Okay. Look, let's flip the question a little bit. Like, I'm a hospital now, so you know your customers obviously very well, so you can step into their shoes. So you're a hospital now. How do you evaluate if I take this product on or not? So how do I do what you would be calling value analysis for a product?
Well, the first thing is, nobody's going to want to hear this. Try not to go through the value analysis committee by just filling out paperwork and submitting it. Okay. There's a gentleman out there. His name is Mark Copeland. He's the VAC whisperer. If you ever heard of him, if you haven't, it's somebody you should look up. I love this guy. He puts everything in a very simple way of understanding, but it sounds, how do I say this? It's not hard to get to this conclusion, but nobody does because it's unconventional thinking. He speaks business to clinical people and clinical to business people. Okay. So you go to a facility and you need to start to socialize your let's say your service. Now it's a product, and here's the problem. Everybody talks about their features and benefits with a product first, and that's a mistake. Okay, you need to talk about the value, the clinical, economic, and strategic value I'm going to deliver to you, your patients, your practice, the healthcare system in general. I've done this multiple times, and I will have doctors, hospital staff ask me, this sounds great, but what are you selling? I haven't even talked about the product yet, right? I said, well, before I get there, if you could do this with your patients, make this amount of money, save this, bring more patients over, knowing this healthcare system, how important is that for you as a strategy for your practice, business, all that? And they're like, well, it's incredibly important. Great. So we align on this. Now let me tell you how we're getting there. And like with our device at Valencia Technologies, we have all clinical advantages, economic advantages, strategic advantages. And we talk about new patients, new patient revenue, clearing up your wait list to shorten it up, to get more new patients in. And we talk about how we do this for urge incontinence. And docs will go, this is unbelievable. How do you do it? Through a nickel-sized stimulator, where most people will bring the nickel-sized stimulator up before they get to the value. And that's a mistake. And so when you go to a hospital, you have to talk business and clinical and why we're going to drive all this value. That changes the conversation because they're used to, great, I've got a 10% cheaper, faster, effective product that they want me to bring into the hospital, which is actually going to cost me more than the 10% to be able to get it in here. So it's not worth it. We've got to change that conversation and not treat the hospitals as if we're trying to hide from them. I hope I can sneak this in through the VAC committee. That's a terrible way to approach it. Let's be bold. Let's be strategically and let's be courageously and tactfully bold with our product as we go to the hospital system. Socialize it before we get to the VAC committee so then people understand truly what that value is. So when your supporters go, they're not just saying it's 10% cheaper, faster, more effective. They're saying, listen, this is all the value that we're going to bring. That's how you bring a product into a hospital.
So what you would recommend is like you go first into a hospital and try to root out a little bit the pain that they're currently having. And then you bring out the solution to it and say, hey, if this could be like, this is your current state, which is not ideal. And then you have the future ideal state. And how if we could bridge that gap? And then they say, yeah, that would be great. That would enable us to do X, Y, Z, and that would be better. And then you bring out the device and say, hey, this is what we have, and this can do this. So yeah, it's basic. It's like this is how you sell
Yeah,
things.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is you mentioned something earlier about commercialization earlier. A lot of startups, and it's usually because of funding, and I understand that, but somehow they got to figure out a way either through contracted work or board members that are more commercially savvy than they are, financially savvy, let's say, to start having those conversations with hospitals and doctors. So as they're getting ready for their launch, they've already weeded out. You'll never get to 100%, 60 or 70% of the obstacles, overcome an obstacle, an objection before it becomes an objection. So figure that all out before you launch. And so when you launch, you're going to these doctors first because they have to buy the product, right? Have those conversations before you launch. Now you're ready to go and you're ready to have those conversations with the hospital, and you'll learn more as you do that, and you'll pivot and you quickly pivot to get better at it. But you have to do this early. I see companies, we're going to get an FDA approval January 1st, and we're going to hire our first salesperson in January 30th. It's like, you don't have any other commercial inputs? No. Okay, that's a problem, right? Because you're going to then this is what will happen. They're going to hire a VP of sales. They're going to hire 20 people. They're going to go on the market. They're going to get their butts kicked, and they're going to blame the VP of sales. Then they fire him or her, and then they hire somebody else. And 70% of the reps quit, and they hire. Look at all the money you're burning through, right? And it happens over and over and over. I go to turnarounds, and that's exactly what they did, right? And they blame the VP of sales. I'm like, it's not his or her fault. It's your fault. And your board isn't commercially savvy. They think they are because they came from a big strategic company and had a sales title at somewhere or marketing and think they're great at it. No, you go to a startup, it's completely different. It is a different animal.
Okay. So how would you do it like the first time, right? So I understand, like usually come in when in Europe we say, or in Germany we say, when the kid is in the well. So, and now your job is to get the kid out of the well. What do we do in order to not fail the first time? So first time right approach. What would you do when you start? When your FDA clearance is coming, what do you do?
So if I'm a CEO and I'm building my product, okay, and we're getting close, we've done a clinical trial, we know the results. We're not published yet. We know the results. I would bring somebody in, and it doesn't have to be your VP of sales, but probably somebody with that experience to be able then to take that product as soon as possible, a year prior to FDA clearance, and start going around the country and meeting with doctors. And also not necessarily the key opinion leading doctors, but your working doctor at a practice who's trying to make a living. Okay. And hit all types of doctors, KOL, university doctors, private practice. A lot of docs work for a hospital system, but they're still running their practice. They still have their goals. Go meet with all these doctors. Start to socialize that value, right? And start to learn from it. Well, what if we did this? If we position that? Can you introduce me to somebody at the hospital? The greatest thing about being introduced to somebody at their hospital is, I'm not trying to sell you anything because I don't have a product to sell you. I'm trying to figure out if I did bring a product of value to you, what value could it create? And I'd like to get your input. You start having those conversations. Now you're building your messaging. So your clinical messaging is your messaging, but now your strategic value messaging, tying the clinical, economic, and strategic value starts to come together. So then let's just say 3 months, 4 months before you're going to have FDA clearance, you then start to hire maybe 10 reps at the most. And you put them through a training process. You put them through the messaging process. And then you get ready to send them out with everything that you learned, and they go execute in the field. Now, here's the thing. You're already wrong. Okay. So when you go to market with your messaging and your plan, you have to know you're wrong. Okay. Not like you're off, like way off, but it's not going to be 100%. And so you need to take that information from the field, and the VP of sales, the VP of marketing, the CEO has to take that real life information in and has to incorporate it. Look for noise, white noise, but where there is consistency across the nation of what the feedback you're getting. And then you start to pivot your strategy, your messaging, and how you go after the market. And once you figure that out, you see that traction, then you'll hire the next 10.
Yeah. I mean, like in my opinion, you also could start earlier. I mean, of course, like at the very, very early stage, you couldn't afford like a lot of personnel, but like this customer feedback, because that all feeds into the design. Like if the design is off, there's nothing you can do. It's not salvageable. But like if you do that at a very early stage and talk to a bunch of doctors, and you have a bunch of, let's say, supporters among the doctors because they really think that this is a problem worth solving, you can incorporate step by step the feedback into the design. Then when you go to clinical trial, you just like expand on what you already have been doing with iterating on the product, and now you're just iterating on your messaging. Okay, I get that. So it's an iterative approach, and the earlier the better.
Now remember though, clinically, so if you go out with a product design, you can't have engineers have these conversations. Okay, because they don't understand the clinical, financial, strategic, operational value to all these people and how to message it.
They just speak in features and benefits.
That's it. Now, if a doc, that's one thing, and go, okay, but then I would ask, okay, doc, if we made this change, how would that impact clinically, financially, and strategically, right? And most of them aren't thinking this way, so you educate them and you say, and that's when you get really, really good conversations going. And so that's very important, right? Okay, we're going to do this, but what's the value?
Okay. So you've also been working like in different fields, in different startups. Would you say that like the different disciplines of let's say physicians, that they have a different mentality? So like orthopedics against like heart surgeons, or what would you say? Like, what are the differences here?
Yeah. So you're right. So I've been in 7 or 8 different specialties, and everyone tells me that their specialty is special. Okay. So it cracks me up because, I took over as CEO of Valencia Technologies, and we had some urology people, and I asked questions. I'm unconventional in the way I approach things. And I ask questions like a 5-year-old kid, why daddy? Why mommy? Why, tell me why you're doing this way. And they're like, wow, it's always been done that way. And, you got to understand, we're special. And I'm like, no, you're not. If every specialty thinks they're special, then no one is special. And I go back to, we're all humans, right? And so let's approach it from a human perspective, that we all have wants, needs, desires, fears, right? I don't care who you are. Now, personality wise, I worked in orthopedics. They're tougher, they're rougher, they're more direct. So you have to have a stronger, shell to be able to deal with it, but also know that most times that's just an exterior bravado. You break through that and you get right to the person, right? And so I worked in ENT. ENT doctors are, they're the same. They're not as tough. They're more open, but you crack through everybody's little shell and you get to the child, that's worried about the same things you and I are worried about. Right? And you take that MD off their name and it's just Bob. Let's just have a conversation. And unfortunately, a lot of reps have a hard time with that because they've been told, and this is when you're hiring in a startup, that when you're working for a strategic, you work for your customers, you actually don't work for your company. And nobody ever says that, but that's how a rep feels. Well, I'm doing the best interest of my customer. Well, no, you're just afraid to challenge them. Right? You're afraid to have meaningful conversations because you're uncomfortable. They're going to be uncomfortable to do that. Rich Clower is my VP of sales at Valencia Technologies, and he taught me something about 6 months ago that I'd never seen in a field, and it was beautiful. We were talking to a doctor, and he said, "Doctor, is it okay, with your permission, that I challenge you on that?" What he just said, right? And I was like, whoa. I was like, that's pretty cool, right? And the doc's ego He was just, it was Bob, right? It was just Bob, And the doc said, yeah, sure. And we had the most meaningful conversation, right? And it was respectful, but it was like, I see things differently and I could be wrong, but this is how I see it. And that led to just a wonderful conversation. And we took that, I took that and I said to our management team, our sales team, I said, this is wonderful. And we could do that with anyone. You could do that with any doctor in any specialty, knowing it's just a child behind that bravado.
Yeah. I think asking for permission is a lot of it, because with your permission, I would like to challenge you on that. And then if he says, yeah, you can challenge me, it's like he invited you basically. So you asked for permission. I think that's very important here, because if you would go in and say like, this is where you're wrong. And he's like, brother, I do this for 40 years.
Exactly.
I don't think that you challenge me, little kid here. So you'll have to be very elegant with it. So what I see it's like different specialties have different, let's say, focuses. I think like orthopedics, especially implants and all that stuff, tends to be very, very conservative. Like in this mindset, look, if I use a new implant, you might die. I can take off your leg and you'll still live. So like, I am putting my reputation, the life of the patient on the line here. So you'll better be better than your competition. You'll better show me that you're safe. And then there's other specialties where there's not as much risk, where they're like more likely to try out new things, and where they also care about different topics. And we'll just come to that. So what's your take on that?
Well, no, I agree. So, but that is a cultural difference, not a personality difference, right? So in cardiology, they need a lot of data first before they're going to make a decision. And because to your point, I'm working on your heart, right? And you could die, right? So you as a company better have a lot of data to back up what you're saying. So from that perspective, I agree. Now, from an orthopedics perspective, they're conservative, but not. I think they're more willing to challenge the status quo if you have some data, right? And you have a good perspective on the holistic thing that I just talked about, the value funnel, right? You'll find there's more early adopters I think in orthopedics than in a lot of different specialties. And somebody will say, I launched a product in orthopedics and I couldn't find anyone to use it. And I'm like, because it sucked. Right? Like, it didn't have any value and nobody believed in the data. It was just a me too kind of thing. So I was in a product and it had absolutely no value, and I figured that out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I thought it had value, but it doesn't. We're never going to sell this thing. And you realize that sometimes too late. But going back to the different specialties, you're right. Just be prepared to have those conversations, knowing the cultural differences, not necessarily the personal differences. Because I don't think an orthopod versus a cardiologist versus an ENT doc, they're all the same, but they have to approach their business a little differently.
Yeah. Because what I found out is like there's some specialties, so in my opinion, like ophthalmology, like eye surgery, especially, they're very, very keen on all these, let's say, environmental topics, because they use extreme amount of single-use medical devices, because the cataract operation is one of surgeries is one of the most prevalent. I think it's 10 million surgeries a year. And this is like a thing that very, very much resonated when I think you put out the video on, hey, look, you have to look at the thing holistically across the supply chain, across every actor. I know that resonated with me very much, because I think it's not as much a topic in the US, but I think in the European Union, it's a lot of a topic. Sustainability, and I think the ecology, like the waste that you generate in the hospital, is quite the amount of waste. It's also like a cost item, but you can't just go ahead and say, yeah, let's do it and more environmentally friendly. Like, patient outcome is worse and it costs a shit ton more. So you can't do that. So what you have to do is like you have to bring together environmental benefits, so less waste, less environmental footprint, better patient outcome, or at least the same patient outcome, and then the economics also have to line up. So you need to align all these values together. So what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, no, but that's exactly it. That's why when we think our customer is the doctor, you're wrong, right? Unless they're doing it in their office in their own practice, right? That you're wrong. It is a multi-headed customer approach. That's how you have to look at it. Who am I satisfying all the key stakeholders, the multi-headed customer? And sometimes you won't satisfy them, but if you can keep them neutral, where they're like, I really don't care. That's fine. It's neutral to me. We're okay. But you have a multi-headed customer approach and you have to look at it that way. And a lot of times, I talk to a lot of startups and they're like, man, my doc really wants it, but I can't get it in. Then you start to unpeel it and go, well, what's the clinical value to the patient, the doctor, the practice? What's the economic, financial? What's the strategic? And a lot of times people look at me like I got 3 heads and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but my doctor really likes it. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to, sorry, unless your doctor owns his own ASC, it's not getting done.
Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about different funding cultures. So like I know a little bit how the funding culture in the EU is, and you know a lot how the US is doing with startups. How would you say, like, how are startups funded in MedTech? Because like you read all kinds of opinions on how that changed within like the last 10 to 15 years. What would you say is the state of funding medical startups?
Well, the thing is, change is constant. So I'd say it's the same because it's always changing, right? And so the venture community is still in, PE's getting more involved. You're seeing what I think is interesting is that Cardinal Health bought Solaris, which is it's practice in ASCs across the country in urology, in which they bought it. So they're actually getting into healthcare, like the practice of healthcare. Now that to me is fascinating. I think that's, a strategic investment and something like that. But most of your large medical device companies are not great innovators. And so they're still involved, right? On the startup side, the VCs are involved and private equity. I've seen a lot of people actually raise money from family trusts, family funds. That's still out there. I know people try to do friends and family. I don't recommend that because you need a lot. And then you've got a lot of people that are calling you every day wanting to know how things are going and that don't understand the business, right? So it's there. The money's there. Things have tightened up a little bit. I think it's more about later stage commercial where they're getting the money, early stage prior commercial. But if you go commercial and you're struggling, you're gonna dilute yourself a little bit more to get it going. I think it's the same as it's always been. If the economy across globally starts going crazy and more money will free up, more people will want to get involved with the startups. But I do see a lot of money put into startups that should never get money. And I find that fascinating, where it's like, I cannot believe you got funded. And as they're failing, they're getting more money. So it's just, it's nuts to me.
Yeah, which one is it? Like the Forbes magazine? It's like Forbes magazine, if you're on front page, it's like there's a high likelihood of you getting arrested for fraud at some point. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that? I think it was like 2, 3, 4 guys and a girl like just got arrested for fraud, and they were in front of Forbes magazine. So what I see in Europe in terms of funding culture is you get there's a lot of initiative going on for innovation and development. And then like maybe, so if you need the big bucks, it's going to be difficult. So like to proof of concept, you'll get like a few $100K here or there or angel money. And then if you need 10, 20 million, it's going to get difficult. And like if you're starting, what I also saw is sometimes due to the MDR, you got some delays. So you get to clinical trials, see that you need to change something on your device because it's not working. Then you have to do one loop, and then like your current funding round is running out and you should be commercializing and you don't have the money to hire reps. And that is bad. I mean, that's kind of the commercialization gap that I would say, because like VCs do not want to go in at that stage. And the private equities are telling you, yeah, tell me that you have 10 million in turnover and stuff like that.
Well, it's kind of interesting is that, there's companies out there that have raised 350 million, $400 million in an implantable device in neuromodulation. And now they're commercial. And it's like, okay, well, you got a lot of selling to do to get that 350 million, right? And so you've got that route. Or do you take a route as a founder and say, I'm going to build this product. I'm going to get it to 2 million to 5 million in revenue and sell it for 30, 40, 50 million, right? And that's your goal. And, I say that you should never build a company to sell it. You should build it for the long term. You can take that same approach with that, saying, I'm only going to hire so much. I'm only going to get here. And then the market will tell me where I need to go. And somebody may want to acquire that thing for $30 to $50 million because you've only got 5 to 6 million in and you could get 30 or 40 million. Well, you've done a great job. But a lot of people are like, but I want the $1 billion, $2 billion exit. Well, that's a whole other game. So when it comes to funding, you also have to, beware of what you really want to do, right? Do I really want to go up against robotics? Like, I know nothing about robotics. I read about it. I read people's opinions about it. I'm astonished about how many robotic companies there are out there. And I don't think most of them are even commercial and or gaining traction, at least in the United States. And yet more and more money is being thrown at this while Intuitive is sitting there just keeping market share. They built this ecosystem, that just keeps everybody out, but more and more money keeps getting thrown at it and all these conversations. And it's just guys sitting in a high chair talking to each other about what they think should happen in a marketplace like robotics who've never actually been in a medical device company having these conversations. But more and more money is flowing into it. I look at that and I don't know what to take from it, because you asked me about funding and I'm like, I can't believe these companies continue to get funding while the competitive environment is so incredibly challenging. And it's not like 20 million, it's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on what's the current hype. I would say, like, if you look a little, even in MedTech, it's like everything that has AI stuck on it, it's everybody's throwing their money at that because they think it's the next big thing. Probably peak bubble territory. I don't know if I'm completely right with it. There's certainly lots of applications for artificial intelligence, but if you just slap AI on it, it doesn't make your company better. You have to actually have to deliver value. It's like, I'd say another option for your, let's say, technical founder, is that you can develop the patent, prove that it's possible, and then sell that. You can sell the company, including the patent, or just have a patent. And because you would be preventing others to go into that space. It's just selling an invention then. You haven't really commercialized it, but it's like a lot of big companies are just doing that, monitoring what's working, see if they have working patents, see if they're getting close to the approval, because they're going to do it all over, the approval stuff again anyways. They just buy the company and commercialize it themselves.
And I think you're right. And I think that's where a lot of founders get just, and you see in these meetings, all these founders go to these meetings, they celebrate themselves and give each other awards for the best CEO, and yet you haven't done anything yet. It's the craziest thing. And they're all looking with this, I want a 500 million to a $2 billion exit. And but you haven't even gotten through your FDA approval process yet, right? You haven't even sold one device. So it's okay not to want to be the $500 million exit, right? It's okay to do other things. And I look at it, if it wasn't for engineers, I'd be the best ditch digger in the world because I'd have nothing to do because I can't create things, right? I don't know how to build anything. So I love my engineers. I love the clinical folks, the MDs who are creative that way to bring products to market. but you don't have to be the next Intuitive. If you're helping our healthcare system and you're helping people, patients, practices to become more effective and efficient, and you sell it $5 million, you're a success in my eyes.
It's not only about that. It's like, I think in Europe, it's much more like your approval costs have gone up significantly with the MDR. It's quite difficult to get. So you'll have to have a significant investment to get the thing to market. It's not that as easy anymore. A trend that we're also seeing is that European startups are going to US first to commercialize there because it's actually more predictable to go with the FDA. As crazy as that sounds under the current administration, but it's easier, it's more predictable than going with Europe. And if you have this extreme investment upfront, you need to have like a big enough market. So one of the biggest problems under the MDR is that you have these orphan devices, like these pediatric devices where you have like 500, 1,000 cases a year. And then your reimbursement is capped at a certain amount per procedure. So there's no way in hell you ever make money on that device. So that's one of the challenges we're facing currently. So maybe a take on that, and then we'll go to more personal part.
No, yeah, it's like I said, I don't know much about Europe, but with the panel that I was at the other week in San Francisco, they had folks talking about working with the FDA, this administration compared to the last, and they're like, nothing's changed, right? It's still easy to work with. Not easy. It's the same. Nothing's changed, right? So it's predictable, right? And that's the thing. You need predictability to bring products to market. The challenge, though, like I've always known that about the European market. It's like you said. So if you're a deformity surgeon in pediatrics at this one hospital, your budget is X for implants. And once you buy all the implants, you're done for the year. Like there's no more, right? And so that makes it hard for innovation, right? It's like I was in the ENT business, and the KOLs in that business were really against the newer technologies that were coming out because it made it easier for everybody else to do the procedures, and they wanted to hold on to their procedure. And we were democratizing some procedures for the masses, and they fought against it. And they still are today. I mean, we're talking 15 years later, plus they're still fighting it. And I said to a doc recently, I said, well, why would I invest in your specialty? Your KOLs don't want innovation. They don't want new things coming out. So you are the cause and source of your problems of no innovation. And if you take that to Europe, it's the same thing. If you're going to limit my success, then why would I invest?
Yeah, that's true. It's true. But you said there's something that I think is interesting. It's like if you have the key opinion leaders, so maybe one of the key opinion leaders was the one that developed a certain procedure, and then you're coming out with a device who flips that procedure on his head and brings something to market that challenges the status quo. What you're doing is you're not bringing them a new tool. You're challenging their claim to fame. It's like they're basing their status on that procedure, meaning that if you challenge that, you challenge my status. And that is something that is very difficult to navigate.
It is. And it's difficult to navigate, but if you can bring it to the masses and the masses start using a product because they recognize it, then eventually not everybody, over time, a majority comes over. But if it takes decades to do that, then you're like, I'd rather go invest my money somewhere else where it won't take that long, right?
Yeah, but I mean, we're a medical device because we also kind of like it because it's changing people's lives. It's helping to make lives better because it's not the easiest way to invest your money. It's like you probably go.
And that's the problem with the venture funds and PE is that perform, hit it. And you're like, yeah, but the patient, we don't care. Where's our money? So you've got that funny balancing act. So it's hard.
Okay. So what advice would you like to give to our listeners in regards of commercialization of medical devices?
If you're a sales rep, don't wrap yourself in your company's flag. Know that companies come and go, that learn as much as you possibly can. Be curious. Be very, very curious. Ask questions. Like Rich Glauer said, can I challenge you on that? Or I don't know if I'm right or not, but this is how I'm thinking about something. Tell me why this might be right or wrong. Take the opportunity with the relationships you have, not for granted, but use them to improve your understanding and intellect about how a doctor thinks. Okay. So you're working for a big strategic company. The hardest part about that job was actually getting the job with your name on the card, right? Because everybody wants to work for these big companies, and then all your contracts are done, all your pricing's established. You're really there to promote a product. That's fine, but take advantage of the time you have with doctors to really learn what matters to them. That will pay you dividends later in your career.
Okay, thank you very much for those insights. So do you have any last words?
No, I think I talked too much already.
Good, thank you very much. So this was Jim Surek. He's the CEO of Valencia Technologies. And until the next time.